In Health Coaching and Beyond, Tim and I aim to mix up conversations between the two of us, chewing over hot topics, latest news and emerging ideas, but also bringing you conversations with thought leaders and people we admire in the field of health coaching and beyond. People we hope will help you think well and spark interesting ideas for yourself. I have to say this week was a special privilege and a challenge for me. I got to interview Dr. Caroline Hart, an academic, a teaching and health coaching practitioner, and globally respected leader in the field of human capability and development. She's also been one of the directors here at Peak Health Coaching since year 2 in 2018, helping us develop robust and ambitious education standards. But she's also my wife. We cover her research at Cambridge University and how relevant it is to the What Matters to You movement and the implementation of health coaching in the NHS, workplaces and society in general. We cover what aspirations are and how we can support people to feel safe enough to explore their hopes and dreams, but then also to feel confident enough to voice them and brave enough to pursue them. Building on Caroline's research, we tie this into Amartya Sen's Nobel Prize-winning capability theory and even consider the role of communities and peer support to support aspirations and capability. I hope Caroline's insights and wisdom from her research and practice help you to think well. Okay, this is a podcast I've really been looking forward to. It's lovely to welcome Dr. Caroline Hart onto the Health Coaching and Beyond podcast. Welcome, Caroline.
Hello, Ollie. Nice to be here.
And as always, I'll give a little intro to the guest. So you had your PhD in Education, Aspirations and Human Development from the University of Cambridge in 2010. You're a qualified teacher. You're a transformational leadership coach. You're a fellow of the Institute of Health Promotion and Education, an organization your father founded. You're a fellow and you sit currently on the Executive Council of the Human Development and Capability Association. And of course, you're one of the directors of Peak Health Coaching, having been with us since 2018. Wow, what a billing.
It's quite a rap sheet.
It's quite a rap sheet. Is there any of those things that you'd like to talk to? So you started off as a teacher. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I didn't actually, my first job out of university was actually not as a teacher, but was working in human resources for Ford Motor Company many, many moons ago. So that's where I started. And I came across some people who were coming into Ford to do team development using outdoor pursuits. And I thought, this sounds really exciting. I think I quite fancy a bit of that. And so I thought, I'm going to go off and do a PGCE, so teaching certificate, so that I can do outdoor pursuits and do team development and kind of human development in a corporate work setting. And so off I went to go and do my teacher training. But then I went out on teaching practice and unexpectedly really enjoyed working in schools with children. And so, yeah, that did then kind of segue me into doing a bit of teaching for a while.
Right. So you were a teacher for a while. There's some quite difficult schools in Bradford. You cut your teeth there in some quite tough schools.
Well, yeah, I've been around the block on the teaching circuit. Started off in Leeds, taught there for a while. I actually then sashayed across to Southeast Asia, worked in Malaysia for a number of years, came back to Europe, worked in international education in Italy for a year. So I kind of experienced the private international education system. And then, you're right, I did come back to Yorkshire, but this time West Yorkshire, Bradford, where I did work in some pretty challenging schools, I have to say. Yes, it was. So I feel like I have seen the full spectrum of different ways of learning through private and public education, home and abroad.
And then you developed an academic career, which has sort of characterized the last couple of decades for you, really, isn't it? And you got your PhD at Cambridge University. And I know your PhD was examined by Amartya Sen, a very famous Nobel Prize winner for economics. Do you want to just share with our listeners who Amartya Sen is? Because your PhD was very based on his capability theory, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot there. So if it's all right, I'm gonna backtrack a little bit, if that's okay. So just going back to Ford, this sort of manufacturing environment, very much at that time, still this kind of division between what you might describe as white collar and blue collar workers. So the guys that were working on the line and then the people kind of sat in the offices kind of doing the sort of management and paper pushing bit. And it was actually during the time that I was there that the very first kind of Equal Opportunities Committee was established. And at the time, there was quite a lot of sexism around, quite a lot of racism. And for me, I'd come out of a social science background at university. The kind of social justice piece and what equality and fairness kind of look like, in this case, in a workplace, was really important to me. So I suppose that did kind of sparked my interest through real kind of life and real experience. So by the time I kind of ended up back in education doing the PhD that you're kind of talking about there, social justice was a really central plank to what I was interested in. At that time, it was very much focused around education and how can educational opportunities and systems give young people an equal chance in life, really. And you mentioned there Amartya Sen. So you're right. Amartya Sen is got the Nobel Prize and all the rest of it. He's an economist and philosopher. And he did a lot of work, he still is active, working in human development. And he kind of uses this approach, which he kind of developed, called the capability approach, which has been very, very influential in my work. He, alongside others, Martha Nussbaum, another key sort of proponent of the capability approach, and many, many other colleagues sort of since, have been doing a lot of work in that area, which, I have been very engaged in over the last few decades.
And I hope we'll go on to talk a little bit around the relevance of capability approach to health coaching. We will get there. But you're also part of this Human Development and Capability Association. Do you want to say a little bit more about that? I guess that's the ongoing championing of the work of Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum and other key leaders in this area, is it?
Well, yeah. I mean, there was a group of scholars, also some sort of people interested in policy, kind of getting together, really kind of thinking around this idea of human development and what does that kind of really look like? When we talk about development, human development, what do we really mean? And it was Amartya and Martha who originally founded this association along with this other wider group of colleagues. And it's kind of continued to grow and thrive since. But one of the core sort of game-changing things, I guess, that they were thinking about is not just looking at economic wealth and, the kind of GDP as markers of the success or growth of a country. But they really sort of started to look at other factors, and in particular, looking at the role of health and education alongside kind of economic factors in thinking about nationally what might we think of as human development, but then also looking at the individual level as well about what is it that makes up a flourishing life, and really kind of asking some quite deep philosophical questions as well as economic questions about that kind of issue. It really resonated with me. And so, yes, I continue to be part of that community. And to try to teeter on the brink of moral philosophy to understand a bit more about some of those issues.
It's lovely to know you're connected sort of globally, really, into this network of thinkers, deep thinkers that consider these big areas. But of course, now you find yourself with a significant role in peak health coaching. Tell us what you do in peak health coaching now then.
Okay, so that's a great question. What do I do? No 2 weeks are the same. That's one thing that I would say. So I'm one of the directors alongside Ollie and Tim and Jennifer. And I guess the hat that I'm wearing is particularly around education standards, the kind of approval and accreditation of our programs, also managing and developing our trainers. So we have a lot of associates who work with us. And so just making sure that everybody is very sort of consistent and high quality in the training that's being delivered, and making sure that what we're doing is really, really relevant, vocationally relevant to the people that we're training. So we do a lot of training with people in health and wellbeing coaching roles, specifically in the NHS, but also with a wide variety of Rs and personalised care roles in the NHS, but increasingly outside of the NHS as well. So in workplaces, and a lot of independent practitioners who are kind of looking at developing their careers to work with a coaching approach. And I love it. So have really nice contacts. I still do quite a bit of the training, particularly the follow-on stuff that follows on from our standard kind of 4-day program. So I'm kind of a bit of a jack of all trades in a way. So, one day I might be looking at course approval, another day I might be working with trainers, another day I might be teaching, another day I might be sitting in a director's meeting. So all manner of kind of things that I get up to.
Yeah, it's lovely to work with you. And I have to say, I'm very glad that you bring in the educational rigour that Tim and I don't have. And I often see you watching videos of people, of associates, making sure our quality assurance is high. So I think that combination of Tim and I's medical background and your educational background is fantastic. But it's an opportunity to dive a bit further, isn't it, into your area of research and your what informed your PhD, but then what you've taken forward afterwards. I don't know, where do you want to start with that? You wrote that lovely paper 2024, didn't you, which we'll connect in the show notes, joining up your research around aspirations and capability and how that feeds into personalised and person-centred care in the NHS and health coaching. So we should dive into that and explore it. Where do you want to start? Where would be a good place to start?
Yeah, I know. Well, in some ways it's a complicated story, but I think in other ways maybe it's not. It is complicated. For me, I guess my raison d'etre as a practitioner, whether that's in teaching or coaching, but then also as an academic, really it is centered around this idea of social justice. So kind of how do we kind of come to understand what do we mean by that? What does it mean to be just, to be fair, socially just? What does that kind of look like? And the reason why the capability approach was so helpful to me was because I was grappling with a very practical situation. So this is going back to year 2000. So it's going back 25 years ago. Government had a policy and it was called the Excellence Challenge. And that challenge was to try to increase the number of young people that were staying on in education beyond the school and going on to get a higher education. And I was given a lot of money and a lot of power, essentially, to do lots of projects and things with young people in Bradford to get them to stay on and go to university. And it very quickly became clear to me that actually wasn't necessarily what all of those young people cared about. It wasn't necessarily what was important to them. And it wasn't necessarily what was right for them, really. And so anecdotally, I could sort of see that there were other things that seemed to be important or priorities for these young people. And that kind of led to one of my first pieces of research that I did, where really I wanted to know what really did matter to them and what were the things that were kind of would enable them to achieve what they wanted and what were the things that might be barriers. So I kind of crafted this research about, what are young people's aspirations and what are the things that kind of help and hinder them in achieving those aspirations. And as part of that work, I read lots of books and I came across this work by Amartya Sen. And he had this concept of capability. And when he talks about a capability or someone's capability, he's talking about the real freedom that somebody has to be able to kind of do or be something that they have reason to value. So it's whether they've got that real opportunity. So not that freedom of speech exists, or not that this idea that anyone can go to university, whatever the thing might be, but can that person in that moment, are they really free to be able to realize that aspiration? And so it kind of led me to ask a different order of questions, not just to look at whether somebody wanted to go to university or whether somebody was at university, but whether they had the freedom. Was it actually a real possibility? And similarly for other aspirations that people might hold that were to do with other aspects of their life. So people talked about following their faith. They talked about families and family values and all of this other kind of stuff. And it helped me to understand that this idea of freedom, whether someone really had that possibility, was crucial. It's not just about what you want or what you achieve, but it's about this freedom sort of piece. And so that then kind of informed a lot of the work that I did after that. And I think it resonates highly with what is going on in health coaching practice and when we're kind of working with people to support them to enhance their health and well-being. I think there's a kind of a very strong relevance and kind of correspondence in that kind of earlier kind of theory and work that I did to kind of where we're working now in the health coaching space.
Yeah, it's fascinating to hear that sort of relevance of what matters most to school kids thinking about going to university. It really resonates, doesn't it, with the what matters to you style approach in the health sector. So it's fundamental, isn't it, that we actually understand what people really want to do. And I think what I've heard from your research is that it's almost starts with, are you able to even possibly dream about what matters most to you? It's that you talked about that, didn't you, about breaking down aspirations into sort of three areas. And I'm going to have a go at it and then bring you in. But what I understood was that the capability to aspire, have you got the freedom to even dream about what matters most to you or even think about it? And then do you have the agency, the freedom to voice that, to actually share that with somebody else, to even maybe admit it to yourself? And then, of course, do you have the capability to go on and realize those aspirations? Does that summarize what I've heard you talk about and heard you write about?
Yeah, absolutely, Ollie. So thank you. So I think you have actually read that.
Yeah, I try and keep up.
Right,
I can't say I understand everything, but I do try my best.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I've written a few papers over the years. So yes, I kind of, there was a book, Aspirations, Education and Social Justice, that really started to kind of lay out this role of aspiration and kind of really trying to explore and understand the concept of aspiration. So what is an aspiration?
Yeah, tell us. Well, please,
Well,
how would you define an
exactly.
aspiration?
Well, so I did a lot of focus groups with young people, trying to kind of find other words. How do we talk about it? So you can sort of think about someone's hopes, someone's dreams, someone's plans for the future, what they are kind of thinking about in their life goals. But that idea of aspiring, literally means to breathe. So to aspire is this idea of being able to have a window into the future and have something that's important to somebody that they would like to be able to achieve. So that aspiration, that dream, that hope, that desire, that's kind of an important thing. But through the application of the capability approach, what I realized was that the capability to aspire, in other words, the freedom to be able to think about and conceive things that you care about, that you would like to achieve, that you desire, that's not a given. And not everybody enjoys the same degree of freedom to aspire, the same degree of freedom to be able to dream about the future. And there are many different reasons for that. There might be cognitive reasons for that. There might be just they've not had that window on the world to be able to imagine what's out there, what the possibilities are, to be able to even envisage that they could possibly be able to live those kinds of lives that they might be thinking about. And then there are other people who may be in a much more privileged situation in the sense that they really can see themselves inhabiting these roles and these ways of life. And they may have the vocabulary and they may be able to have that abstract imagination. So we have this massive difference in just how possible is it for someone even to be able to imagine a way of life, a way of being or doing that they have reason to value. It's not a given. And so I guess that's the first thing for people who are out there working in these health coaching roles. It's a super valuable opportunity to be able to hold a space, to be able to support people, to be able to nurture this idea of a freedom to aspire, a freedom to be able to imagine a future that really means something to that person. So that's the first thing. The second thing, and this is critical, is the capability or the freedom to be able to voice an aspiration. Okay, so in the research that I did with hundreds and hundreds of children and young people, what I found is that many of them had aspirations that they had never shared with anybody else, ever. And many, a third of them never shared. And similar numbers where they said that they were afraid of sharing their aspiration with any other living soul. And again,
afraid of sharing their aspirations.
Afraid just to say what it is that they care about, afraid to say what it is that they dream about, that they desire, afraid to say what that future is. So they might have thought about it. They might have been able to get to that point of being able to think of something, but that they've never shared it or that they feel scared to share it. So again, in that health coaching space where we talk about this kind of non-judgmental space where we're really listening, we're kind of holding that space, encouraging people to think well, that's an amazing opportunity to be able to, again, support people to the point where they feel safe enough and supported and not judged, where they might be able to voice their aspiration. And actually what we know from the literature is that voicing is a really important part of making something a reality. It doesn't make it a reality, but it's a really important step along the way. So that's the second step. So the first one, freedom to aspire, freedom to dream in the first place. The second is that capability to be able to voice what's important to somebody, where is it that they would like to get to. And you get this thing of what we call partial aspiration voicing. So somebody might say, well, I'd like to stay on in education, but they may not actually say that means going to university because it's too scary to say that bit because they might fail. And in health and well-being, we will see that all the time, that somebody sort of says, well, I want to be healthier, but they're not going to actually say specifically what it is necessarily, because to name it is to make yourself vulnerable. Anyway, so that's the second thing. And then the third thing is the capability to realize. So having worked out what's important and having voiced it, the third part is how do you actually make that a reality? So in terms of the actual lived outcome, so how do you make that a way of being and doing, a way of life that can actually happen? And in a way, that's really difficult because we know about social determinants of health. We know about some of these external factors in someone's wider social or kind of physical environment, cultural environment, policy environment. There are all these other kind of confounding factors. But again, in this role of kind of health coaching, person-centered care, we have these opportunities to be able to help people to think about, okay, we now know what you really want. we've kind of heard you say that. Where in the, the real world can you land it? And it might be that, what you're aspiring to may not be something that you can reach right now in its fullest way, but there may be some steps along the way. There may be a different iteration of it that is something that could be realizable. And being able to support people to think that through and to be able to identify and understand the social and environmental constraints that they're working with, sometimes even the legal constraints that they're working with or the political constraints, kind of can enable someone to get to a place where they can now they can see a way forward. It's kind of forward momentum, movement in the right direction. So it might not happen tomorrow or next week, but it's forward momentum. And so those three things, that kind of freedom to aspire, freedom to voice, and freedom to realize, the three important things that
Thank you.
work.
Thank you, Karen. I think there's such important insights, those, aren't they? And it's so interesting that it's actually grounded in research that you've done. And I think we just underestimate, don't we, the importance of allowing people the safety to be able to really think about. Let's put it in our terms. We often say, what matters most to you? It's actually sometimes really difficult for people to do that. And even if they do know, it's often very scary to voice it. They expose themselves to a lot of vulnerability. And I think we underestimate the importance of health coaching, what that creates for people at those very early stages before they even get on to realizing it and making it happen and thinking about how it can happen. And I do wonder about the role the whole system plays in that as well. It kind of almost happens, it has to be in the DNA of how we operate as a system, doesn't it? That we do want people to be able to have the space to be able to sort of explore this, and we do want people to be in control and have agency, and it really matters. And so taking that time and space and having the people right from the front door, how you're greeted by the receptionist, how the how the patient information leaflets are written, how the outcomes are measured in our system, they all need to probably sing to this aspiration for us as a system, I guess, to realize these things are difficult and that we need to, if we're going to have social justice, we're going to have to nurture people along this gently. It'll be easier for some than for others.
Yeah. I think everybody's got a part to play. I think it's exactly as you say. It's a receptionist can make a big difference. Just how you look at someone, how you greet somebody, the setup of the venue, all of these sorts of things, they do, there's all this kind of silent messaging, I think, that kind of goes on that enables somebody to feel comfortable or not, valued or not, seen or not. And I think we cannot overestimate the value that we can add by just how we are showing up in whatever our role is.
And this concept that things could be partially revealed. People will tell you perhaps what they want you to hear or what feels safe, but actually having that time and space to dig a bit deeper. We often say, don't we, don't just take the first answer, what else is going on? And maybe it feels like it's a one-off conversation, but maybe actually it's a whole process and it happens over time as well. I don't know, was there anything else about your research that came out about what makes it easier for people to, feel this capability to aspire or feel the confidence to voice their aspirations?
Well, I think, going back to the kind of the what matters to you kind of piece, I think that's quite a big question, what matters to you, to kind of be able to kind of sum that up in a nutshell. It's quite big. And people won't always necessarily frame that as an aspiration. So the thing about aspirations is that they are future orientated and there is some sort of commitment, some idea of, kind of being committed to a particular kind of a future or place that you want to get to. Whereas if you're asking somebody what matters to you, then they may be more kind of generalized about it. So it might be my family is important to me, my education is important to me, my job's important to me, my relationship is important to me. And that's kind of great. But actually what we really want to know is, okay, what does that look like in terms of an aspiration? If your family is important to you, if your health is important to you, etc., what does that look like as an aspiration? And that's where I would kind of take people back to this idea of this three-part concept, if you like, that the kind of that being able to imagine, what does kind of, you say, my family is important to me. Well, what does that look like as an aspiration? That's quite complex. It's quite complicated. And so some people might be able to very readily articulate that, either because they've thought about it for a while or just because it comes more easily. But for others, that will be an enormous question, and often loaded, with emotion as well. Not just rational thought, but there's kind of there's emotion in there as well. And so again, it takes us back to some of the core principles that we would apply in that person-centered, thinking out, health coaching kind of relationship, where we give time, we give space and opportunity to revisit a number of times, over time. Just because you heard somebody say something one week, doesn't mean that's the whole story, because, they may be holding back. They may be still in a process of evolving their ideas, of finding the power to be able to voice and articulate, and the courage. Yeah. And the kind of feeling safe to be able to do that. And I guess the other thing that I would say is that, a challenge for professionals working in this space is that, we've got a wider social, cultural environment around us that individually we might not be able to do much about. There's a lot of stuff going on out there in the world that's difficult for us, as individuals to make a difference to. There are lots of constraints out there, and yet at the same time, we still want to be able to be supportive and help people to kind of think well about their sort of situation and how they can make the best of it. But that's going to look different for different. And so that's why in the 24 paper that I wrote, I write a lot about communities, and I write about what's going on outside of the health and social care system, and the role that others play, really important roles for communities and kind of different voluntary organisations out there. We're part of a bigger whole. So despite the fact that the NHS is one of the biggest employers on the planet, we need to be working in relation to all of that other stuff that's out there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Was that something that came out in your research, that I guess you were almost saying there, the power of communities alongside your individual agency and what you do for yourself? We see that as an enabler for enabling people to realise some of their aspirations and have this capability to put things into action?
Yeah, absolutely. And it very, very much came out of the work that I did in relation to education. So I looked at, in this case, I was looking at schools as institutions. So I was looking at, what role do schools play, what the educational space, but the other spaces that were in these young people's lives, and lots of them had employment. So workplaces were also really important environments for those young people to be developing aspirations, being able to kind of fulfill the things that kind of matter to them, and building their capability, building their freedom, if you like. But also family was really, really important, had a massive role to play in terms of significant others and the kind of influence of family culture grounds. For lots of young people, faith was really important. It was a very diverse kind of communities that I was working with. And so that was a kind of another space. And then leisure and recreation. So, these young people were kind of going out, and they were kind of, recreating in different ways, in different spaces, in their kind of, towns, and, with friends and kind of all the rest of it. And actually, there's an interaction between all of those spaces. So the same individual is kind of moving between these different spaces. And depending on where they are, they inhabit those spaces differently. The power dynamics are different. How they are regarded is different in these different spaces. So being alongside peers is different from the relationship with an employer or with a parent or with a teacher. And that was really, really important. And if you think about it, when we're thinking about health and well-being and supporting people to flourish through our, person-centered care or health coaching work, etc., it's a similar kind of a thing. People are kind of there with you for a period of time, and you hold that space in a particular kind of a way. But actually, that person might also be a parent or a sibling or an employee or an employer. They might be president of the golf club or whatever they might sort of be. And in all of those spaces, the kind of power relationships are configured differently. The freedoms that they enjoy are different. And actually, that's important in terms of the overall freedom that individual has to move towards something that really matters to them. And so taking the time to kind of understand that and to raise awareness of that for that individual can be really, really powerful, because it may be that in one setting, somebody doesn't feel very powerful, but actually that there are other spaces that they're moving in where in fact they have a lot of power or a lot of what we might call agency. And that's what we want to promote. We want people to feel that they do have agency and that they do feel empowered, and that they can make a tangible progression towards a way of life that resonates with them, that they have reason to value.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear you say that. Actually, that it's not just a nice idea, is it? This whole idea of social prescribing and considering people's context, their family, their home life, their work life, all play really important parts in how an individual or how a whole community is able to have this freedom to aspire and to pursue things that they have reason to value, as you say. So I'm going to, given your multi-decades of research in this area around aspirations and capability. You've had time to think about that in the context of where the NHS is going, person-centred care, and indeed the role of health coaching in that. Do you want to speak a little bit more to how you see the kind of latest direction of personalised care and perhaps health coaching in the context of the research that you've done and the academic kind of insights you have?
Yeah, I guess pretty huge, isn't it? But yeah, let's just
sorry to just put that one on the table. You can take it wherever you want. You can take it wherever you want, Caroline.
Yeah, I mean, what I'd say is that it was, a breath of fresh air to see the World Health Organization I think it was back in 2007, start talking about person-centered care. And I think they did call it person-centered care. And this then got picked up by National Health Services around the world in different ways, and it was picked up in the UK and became sort of more kind of personalised care, which does actually have some sort of slightly different connotations in a way. But the fact that we've got the World Health Organization putting on the map some way of kind of thinking a bit more about the person, putting them at the center of things. For me, coming with my capability background and, for all my pals, it's like, yes, hooray, this is great. And then interestingly, we also had in the UK, we had the Oneness report. So that was back in 2002. So going back a bit further, and for people who maybe not aware, that was actually commissioned by the Treasury Department, not actually by the Department of Health here, which is interesting. And it was all to do with, can we afford the NHS? How much is it costing us? And, what does the future kind of look like? And Oneness kind of came up with these 3 different scenarios. And the scenario that he thought was the one that was going to enable the NHS to be sustained in the longer term was what he described as the fully engaged scenario. The fully engaged scenario was about getting the general public on board and participating in the management of their care and in helping to look after themselves. And in a way, a shift away. I mean, I always sort of think maybe the NHS was given the wrong name because it was called the National Health Service. And that sort of suggests that you're kind of going and getting something perhaps somewhat passively. And actually, we want people to be a bit more active, don't we? So I think there's been some game changer sort of, if you like, insights. So I think Oneness in 2002, followed by Darzi, I think 2008, and then I think again, was it 2024 or more recently, the sort of follow-up Darzi report. All of those have spoken to this idea of a fully engaged scenario, so greater participation by individuals in their care. And I would fully kind of endorse that. We want people to have agency. We want people to feel empowered. We want people to be able to feel they do have a role to play and they can make an important contribution to enhancing their I talk about human flourishing, but their health and well-being broadly, sort of conceived. So I think that's been really important. When I look at the introduction of the R's roles as part of the kind of personalised care implementation within the NHS, I think it has game-changing potential. It has truly transformative potential. The NHS is a massive organisation. It's available to everybody in the country, and so there's this great sort of potential. The slight downside, tiny little downside, is that we still seem to be very locked largely into a medical model of care, and that to be able to kind of make this person-centered care approach work, I think we need more people to kind of become aware of it and to buy into it and see what the potential is. I think that's one thing. And I think there's a kind of a new public management efficiency kind of managerial kind of thing that kind of goes on in institutions. And the NHS has not been an exception to that. So we kind of have these kind of quaff points and performance indicators that are not necessarily speaking to a person-centered care agenda or a kind of a capability agenda of the type that we've been talking about today. And so there are some tensions there. So it is about taking a risk. It is about kind of saying, there is a better future. There's a better future for all of us that's in terms of resources, more sustainable. Because if we get more people involved in this fully engaged scenario, it takes some of the heavy lifting off the NHS, which we desperately need to do. At the same time, it empowers individuals, so it makes them feel better straight away. And people start doing more to be able to support themselves towards the futures that really matter, to them. So it's a kind of a win-win, but we're a way off it. And so that's my kind of thing. There's really, I think, compelling reasons to do it. It's the right thing to do. It's the just thing to do. But it does mean quite a big kind of mindset shift. Of course, it's not applicable to every health condition. Of course, there are certain things where you do need the heavy lifting to be done by the NHS, and thank goodness it is there. But there are lots of areas of our life in terms of health and broader thinking about well-being where actually this kind of person-centered care approach, a kind of a health coaching approach, where we allow people this kind of time and space and support and encouragement to think freely, can actually be really, really powerful in helping people make steps forward.
Yeah, it's interesting. Thank you. You put that beautifully. And it's so interesting. We interviewed Professor Chris Ham a couple of episodes back, and he talked about oneness as well. And it's interesting, isn't it? That was 2002, and it predicted economically, as well as obviously the benefit to people, the outcomes, people's outcomes, but the economic predictions came true. He said in 20 years' time, if we don't fully engage people, there'll be a £30 billion difference, and almost to the billion. It's kind of proven to be true. The costs have escalated as he predicted. And what you're saying, and what I think what Professor Chris also said, there was no description of how it could be done. Although Oneness said we need to do it, it was quite short on actually how we do it. So I guess health coaching is part of that, how we do it. And how do you think we're doing then, given how we're going with health coaching?
Yeah, I mean, that was sort of, I guess it's, is it a critique? I don't know. I think it probably wasn't in the terms of reference for Oneness to come up with the kind of how we're going to do it.
Sure.
I think they kind of came up with the kind of what needs, you've got option A, B and C, kind of the do nothing, do a bit and do a lot. And he went with the we need to do a lot. We need to really be fully engaged here. We all need to be kind of on board. Then the next thing that needed to happen was, okay, well, what is the blueprint then? And that's
how we're going to do it.
That's the bit that's been missing for 20 years. And it's like, yeah, I think health coaching is valuable. I think the other R's are also the kind of social prescribing link workers, care coordinators, care navigators, doing this sort of wider teaching all the health and care staff about what matters to you type training, the kind of making every conversation count, all of that stuff, amazing. But I still think that we need to harness the potential of communities. We need to not be totally reliant on NHS or individuals, but we need to be kind of mobilizing whole communities and some of the other amazing organizations that are out there. And so, yeah, there's a big piece here about how do we work together? How do we kind of integrate the kind of health and care, but broader kind of organizations? That includes, like I say, faith organizations. It might be charities. It might be just, kind of on your street. Who do you know? When did you last speak to them? When did you last ask somebody how they were? Or, kind of think about how actually together you can support one another.
Yeah,
I mean, we think about things like mental health and loneliness. These are some of the biggest health issues facing this country. What can we do about loneliness? Well, actually, all of us can do something. All of us can do something. We don't need to be a qualified nurse or a medic to think about what can I do in my community to try to do something to help someone alleviate their loneliness, or to support somebody with their mental health. Or in your workplace, just kind of looking around, just being aware that people are not going to shout about some of this stuff, but there's always something that we can do to contribute. And actually, that's kind of what we need to do as part of our common humanity, is not wait for a government policy or a change of government, or a new, few £1 million to drop for us to do something. We just kind of need to wake up a little bit and think about what can each of us do.
And that's exactly what Sir Chris said, wasn't it? That you don't wait for. He'd been sat in the powers of corridors of power and seen how policymakers work, and they're driven by all sorts of things that motivate them, often economic. And actually, if we know what we need to do, we need to just get on and do it. He was encouraging us, wasn't he, to go for it. And I suppose health coaching is certainly our attempt at peak health coaching, isn't it? Is to try and build in the really specific, deliberate skills in either a dedicated role or in people who are going to take on this mindset, to have some skills under their belt. But it is a mindset shift, isn't it? And I guess what you're saying is that mindset shift needs to happen in us as healthcare professionals, but it also needs to happen within communities. And you're highlighting there the value of peer support. We've certainly seen that playing out in so many health systems, haven't we? Where the value of someone who isn't a healthcare professional, but perhaps has some lived experience or just cares about the person, and somehow giving them permission and shining a light on this of it being important also enables it to happen. I was really struck by what you said there about allowing someone to have their voice in terms of their capability to aspire, but maybe there's something about allowing peers and communities to play their part as well, allowing them to have a voice in this.
Yeah. I mean, I think I totally agree, and I think that's all important. The one thing I suppose that I have to say, because maybe some of my social justice colleagues might listen to this podcast, is that I think we have to be very, very careful that we don't, by saying that everyone's got a role to play, individuals have a role to play, the community has a role to play, we don't let government off the hook. I'm not one for letting government off the hook. Okay. I think we do need policies that that support this way of thinking, that do support people living well and flourishing. I'm not sure that all of our policies do. I'm not sure they do all have the right priority. So I think it's really important that we do pressure people who are in positions of power, the guys that are, making up the laws, the guys that are writing the policies, the politicians that represent us in government, not only nationally, but on a global scale. It's really important that we do hold them to account and that we do keep the pressure on. If we put this in a kind of a global sphere, the biggest issue that we've all got right now, actually, is the planetary kind of constraints that should I say the constraints that we're putting on the planet. Environmental kind of challenges that are human made are the biggest threat to our health and well-being globally. And actually, when you start to look at that macro level, some of those issues really can only be addressed collectively on that kind of international and global scale. And so, we actually don't want to let government off the hook in individual nations or kind of globally. We actually really do need them to do some of that heavy lifting so that, with the rest of us kind of doing what we can do together, we kind of make that difference. But I do think sometimes people do feel a bit disillusioned when they kind of look at the higher level kind of politics and the people who are supposed to be representing our interests at that kind of national and global level. And so, yeah, it'd be really nice to be able to kind of see good examples being set that help to kind of build and kind of sustain momentum amongst the kind of neighborhoods and communities and things. So it wouldn't be right for me to kind of not say that. I think there's quite a lot.
Well,
to kind of keep the pressure on and kind of think again about how do we, through collective action, how do we put that pressure on to the people who are in those sort of positions.
Well, I have to say, I know firsthand that you don't let people off the hook. You're dogmatic about pursuing fairness and your commitment to social justice as a whole. And I do admire the way you do that with compassion, but with persistence and consistency. And maybe that's something we need just to hold. It was Sir Chris's advice to us was just to carry on, keep going, doing the right thing. Have you got any last advice to health coaches listening? So health coaches working in the NHS, health coaches perhaps working now in workplaces. As you said, workplaces are very important. The leisure industry is starting to take on coaching skills to enable people to articulate what matters most to them and convert it into ways that they can realize that. Any sort of final advice or kind of thoughts for people to hold?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much to anybody out there who is listening, who is in one of these kinds of roles where you're using a health coaching approach or person-centered care to support people, whether that's one-to-one or in groups. Really, really big respect, and thank you so much for what you're doing. And I guess it's you are a candle, you are not in the dark, and keep doing what you're doing. And just to sort of say, yeah, there is research and there is evidence that's really backing up what you're doing. It's important work, it's vital work, and it is making a difference. Every conversation that you're having will be making a difference. So thank you.
And we'll certainly put links to your research, Caroline, in the show notes. How you've drawn on aspirations, Amartya Sen's capability theory, and tried to bring it to show its relevance to the What Matters to You movement, to health coaching, to personalised care as a whole. So great. Thank you. Thank you for being part of Peak Health Coaching and how you hold me and Tim to account. You don't let us off the hook. The whole organisation benefits from your rigour and your back. So thanks very much. And I hope people have enjoyed that. We'll leave it there, I think. Thanks, Caroline.
Thank you very much. All right. See you again soon. Bye.
Bye.